Tonight, we're heading into the deep backwoods of West Virginia, a place untouched by time, crawling with cold fog, and hiding a motel that locals swear was never meant to exist. A place known as a Hollow Creek Motor Lodge. Travelers who pass through these hills report strange things, footsteps outside their doors, whispers rising through the vents, shadows that don't belong to any living person. And the most chilling stories all lead back to Room 7. Our story begins with Daniel Harper, a 27-year-old geology student returning home from a field survey. What should have been an easy 3-hour drive turned into a nightmare the moment a rock slide blocked the main highway. Forced onto a narrow forest road that wasn't on any map, Daniel spent hours winding through the woods. No towns, no people, no signal. Just endless trees and the growing sense that night was closing in fast. When the gas light finally blinked on, Daniel knew he was in trouble. He was debating whether to sleep in the car when he saw it. A flickering neon sign, glowing weakly through the fog. Hollow Creek Motor Lodge vacancy. The building looked abandoned. Peeling paint. Dim porch lights. Not a single car in the parking lot besides his own. But with no fuel and night falling, Daniel had no choice. Inside the lobby, the air felt cold, unnaturally cold. Behind the front desk sat an old man with sunken eyes and skin pale as candle wax. He stared at Daniel for an uncomfortable amount of time before speaking. "You lost?" he finally croaked. Daniel nodded. "Just looking for a room. Gas station around here." The old man didn't answer question. He simply reached under the counter and slid a heavy brass key across the wood. The tag read, Room 7. As Daniel reached for it, the old man grabbed his wrist. His grip was ice cold. "Stay inside after midnight," he said. "Don't open the door. And whatever you do, don't open the curtains." Daniel laughed nervously. "Okay, sure." The clerk didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. Daniel took the key and hurried off to Room 7. The moment he stepped inside, the air shifted. Heavy, thick, like the room hadn't been opened in years. The curtains were thick green velvet, coated with dust, hanging like suffocating drapes around a coffin. Daniel plugged in his phone. Nothing. Dead. The TV only showed static, no matter how many times he hit the side. And the room had an odd smell, wet dirt mixed with something metallic. He tried to sleep, but the silence was unsettling. Around 12:47 a.m., he woke to the sound of footsteps. Slow, dragging, footsteps just outside his door. S-C-H-H, S-C-H-H, S-C-H-H. Daniel froze. The footsteps stopped right in front of Room 7. Then came a soft knock. Not loud, not forceful, almost polite. As if the person on the other side didn't want to wake anyone else, just him. Daniel didn't move. The knock came again, a little louder this time. Then a voice. "Let me in, it's cold out here." The voice sounded distorted. Wet, like it was bubbling through thick liquid. Daniel whispered, No way." The voice spoke again. Lower, angrier. "Daniel, open the door." His stomach dropped. He had never told anyone here his name. Something wasn't human about the way it said it. Daniel stayed silent, barely breathing. After a long, tense minute, the footsteps dragged away down the walkway and disappeared. Just as he was starting to calm down, something tapped on the window. Tap, tap, tap. Daniel stared at the curtains. Thick, dusty, completely still. Tap, tap, tap. Then a silhouette formed behind them. A tall figure. Shoulders slumped unnaturally. Head tilted to the side. Far too much for any normal person. It raised one hand slowly and pressed it against the window through the fabric. The outline of long fingers showed through. Then the fingertips began to drag downward across the curtain. Soft, slow, scratching. Daniel scrambled into the bathroom and locked the door. He stayed there terrified, shaking for hours, until the first light of morning crept under the door. When he finally emerged, the room looked normal again. Quiet, still, but he didn't waste a second packing his things. He rushed to the lobby to confront the clerk, but the lobby was empty. Coffee pot cold, counter dusty. No sign anyone had been there in days. He walked outside to his car, ready to leave this nightmare behind. But then he saw the dirt beneath his window. Footprints. Large, deep footprints. Bare, but not shaped like human feet. Long, thin, toes pointed like claws. Pinned under his windshield wiper was a piece of paper-torn motel stationery, written in uneven, shaky handwriting. If you saw IT, it knows you now. Daniel looked toward the tree line. The fog was thicker than before. Silent, still, but he felt eyes on him watching from the woods. He jumped into his car and sped away until the motel disappeared completely behind the trees. When he reported the incident to the police, they told him something he'll never forget. The Hollow Creek Motor Lodge closed down over 20 years ago. Burned out. Condemned. There's no clerk there. There's no electricity. Daniel insisted he saw lights. They shook their heads. Son, the building hasn't had power since '89. And room 7? It's been boarded up since the last man who stayed there disappeared. Since that night, Daniel says he still hears things sometimes when he tries to sleep. Dragging footsteps in the hallway of his apartment, soft tapping on his bedroom window, and occasionally a voice whispering from the dark, "Open the door." And even now, travelers passing through rural West Virginia claim to see a glowing neon sign through the fog late at night. The Hollow Creek Motor Lodge. Vacancy. Waiting. If you ever see it, keep driving, because if you check into room 7, you might not check out. Daniel thought the nightmare ended when he drove away from the Hollow Creek Motor Lodge. But fear doesn't stay trapped in a building, and whatever stood behind those curtains in room 7, it hadn't stayed behind. It followed him home. He reached his apartment in Columbus just before sunset, exhausted, trembling, convinced he'd outrun something he could barely understand. He locked every door, closed every curtain, and tried to convince himself it was over. A hallucination, a dream, a trick of exhaustion. But the first night back proved otherwise. At exactly 1:12 a.m., Daniel woke with the unsettling feeling that someone was in his room. The curtains beside his bed were open just a crack, letting a thin line of moonlight stretch across the floor. And that's when he saw something passing in front of the window. A shape, a distortion. Not footsteps, not the outline of a man, but a presence that seemed to glide across the outside wall. He didn't move, didn't breathe. He waited until sunrise before daring to get out of bed. 2 days passed without sleep. Daniel tried to tell himself he imagined it. Stress, trauma. But on the third night, his phone rang. Unknown number. He ignored it. It rang again, and again. On the 4th call, he finally answered. No one spoke, just breathing. Wet, shallow, uneven. 10 seconds. 20, 30, then a single word dragged through static, like it was crawling out of a drain. Daniel, his blood ran cold. It was the same voice he heard through the door of room 7. He hung up. His hands shook so violently he dropped the phone. When he checked the call history, he saw something that made him physically sick. The call came from his own number, and the timestamp read 12:47 a.m., the exact time he first heard the knocking at the motel. By the end of the week, Daniel wasn't eating or sleeping. His best friend Mason came by after Daniel stopped replying to texts. Mason listened to the story, but he didn't believe it. He stayed to make sure Daniel wasn't going to hurt himself. Around 3:19 a.m., Mason woke on the couch to a whisper coming from the front door. At first, he thought it was Daniel talking in his sleep, but Daniel's bedroom door was closed. Mason sat completely still as the whisper grew clearer. Someone was standing on the other side of the door, whispering slowly, deliberately. Then came the sound of fingernails dragging across the wood. A soft scrape. Up and down. Up and down. Mason held his breath. Then he heard it. Open the door. He sprinted to Daniel's room and found him sitting up in bed, pale, shaking, eyes full of terror. "It found me," Daniel whispered. "It wasn't the motel, it was room 7. Daniel started researching everything he could find. At first, nothing appeared. Hollow Creek Motor Lodge had barely existed online, no reviews, no historical records, nothing. But eventually he found an archived newspaper article from 1989. Local man found dead behind Hollow Creek Motel Room 7 sealed off. The autopsy could not determine the cause of death. The body was described as gray, brittle, eyes missing as if something had drained the life out of him slowly. That wasn't the worst part. The article mentioned similar sightings before the motel closed. A tall, crooked figure seen watching travelers through their windows. Shoulders hunched, head hanging to one side at an impossible angle, hands too large for his body. Locals called it the Lingerer. Not a ghost, not a demon, something older, something that clung to places where death left a stain that would never wash away. Room 7 wasn't just a room. It was its anchor, and Daniel realized, with growing dread, that he made a fatal mistake. When he stepped out of the bathroom that morning at the motel, he looked directly toward the window. He saw the silhouette behind the curtains, and the Lingerer saw him back. That night, Daniel tried to stay awake, but exhaustion took him. He drifted into a light, uneasy sleep. He woke up to darkness. Not the darkness of a room at night. A deeper, suffocating black like every light in the world had been stripped away. Something breathed in the corner of his room. Slow, heavy, each exhale wet and ragged, like air forcing its way through lungs full of mud. Daniel didn't move. He didn't need to see it to know what it was. Then it whispered to him right beside his ear. "You left the curtains open." Daniel screamed and scrambled off the bed, fumbling for a light. When he flipped the switch, the room flooded with light. But nothing was there. Only long, wet footprints on the floor, leading from the window to his bed. And they stopped inches from where his head had been laying. Daniel packed his things and left the apartment that night. Mason begged him to stay. But Daniel knew something Mason didn't. The Lingerer wasn't tied to motel anymore. It followed him because he saw it. And once you see it, it stays with you, waiting, watching, whispering. And Daniel realized a horrible truth. You don't escape Room 7. You take Room 7 with you.